When I think about you, I think what's particularly cool is that you're into lifestyle design. You've really thought about how doing what you do as an indie hacker can give you a better life. It doesn't seem like you're just in it for the money. In fact, I mean, we'll get into this, but you obviously left a very high paying job to do what you do. But in doing some research for this episode, I found your indie hackers account and I went back to like the earliest comment that you've ever made, which was on February 27th of 2019. So this is like right after you left your job at Amazon. And I had posted something asking everybody, what their top reasons were for becoming indie hackers. Why were they indie hackers? And you had the number one comment. I don't know if you remember this, but you got like 18 upvotes. And you said, I want to work on my own terms, doing the things that intrinsically motivate me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I don't remember that, but it sounds like something I would have said back then. um, yeah, I think at one point I realized that I had been at Amazon, I think. So in total, I spent 8 years at Amazon, but I think about 5 years in, at one point I looked around me and I sort of realized that no matter how much more I'm going to get promoted, no matter how many more raises I'm going to get, no matter how much more money I'm going to be making, my lifestyle was unlikely to change significantly or to move closer to one that better matches my preferences. Which I started to realize that my ideal lifestyle is one where I have lots of control on what I work on, sort of choosing from where to work on, choosing what not to work on, right? Something that in a typical career, you're typically restricted, right? So I had started searching, and it took me probably a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, until sort of I managed to take the plunge and sort of abandon a career that by every measure, by all metrics, was succeeding. Was getting promoted. I was very, very much in high regard at Amazon. Everyone was telling me had a very bright future. I was getting encouraged to stay. They were rewarding me financially extremely well, way beyond my my wildest expectations. But yeah, sort of, I thought that basically I managed to get to know many people quite closely that had been there either for a long time at Amazon or sort of similar big tech companies. And to be completely honest, I really didn't like their lifestyles, right? And I started wondering for myself, is this it, right? Is this what I'm going to be doing for the next 10 years, 20 years? I had just had 2 kids, right? So I was sort of raising a young family. And I really didn't want to sort of be a person who, leaves home before everyone wakes up. You arrive home as soon as almost as everyone else is going to sleep, right? You're exhausted. Even if you manage to work just a 40-hour week in that type of career, you're typically just mentally drained, right? It sort of takes all the energy out of you. So long story short, and we'll dive more into the details, I think, I pretty much left at the beginning of 2019 in February without any concrete plans, actually, of what I was going to be doing. I was extremely lucky. I think I had a very healthy amount of savings. I had managed to save about over 5 years worth of expenses. Right? So sort of that gave me some peace of mind to spend some time exploring and experimenting and figuring things out. And yeah, that's what I did. And maybe we'll sort of go into some of the details of how that turned out to be about a year and a half later.
I mean, I think it's the ending to your story a lot of people are familiar with. And it's not the end, obviously, you're still, in progress, but now you've made, hundreds of thousands of dollars from products that you've created in the last year and a half. You're working an extremely cool lifestyle. Like, for example, like when we were scheduling this podcast, I just DM'd you on Twitter and was like, hey, can we push this back an hour? And you're like, sure, no problem. I've got nothing on my schedule today. And that's very much by design. Like you keep your schedule open and empty. You don't like have a busy calendar because you want to be able to basically fill up your days doing whatever you want.
Absolutely. No, I'm extremely careful what commitments and obligations I get into. You can never really take nothing, right? So it's not absolutely against any commitment or any obligation. But I like to, I'm definitely designing and arranging my life in such a way where I have lots of spare time, like lots of uncommitted time. Because, and this is something I'll admit, I started discovering this, that I enjoy this after I left my career, after I left my job. Right? Sort of initially, I thought I was just going to focus 100% on one thing and just sort of, just use all mental energy directed on just one thing. But as the months progressed, sort of, I started to realize that um, I'd rather have, wake up in the morning, just do the very minimal things, check my emails, whatever. And then after 10 a.m., like my whole day is free and I can use inspiration, opportunity, whatever happening during the day to sort of figure out where to spend my time, where to spend my energy. And sometimes they're not even work related, right? Sometimes it's a sunny day outside, my kids are home and we decide to, spend the day with the family, right? Which is definitely an intentional part of weaving my personal life together with my work arrangements, which I'm extremely enjoying, right? And I think it's extremely healthy if you can do it.
I've got kind of a similar approach to life, or like a desire to have these very unstructured days where I can wake up and just do whatever I feel really excited to do. Which on one hand is great because then you're almost always basically having a great day. If you don't feel like working on your ebooks today and you want to work on your podcast or your Twitter or whatever it is, like you can just do that and it's going to be a great day. But on the other hand, what I realized very quickly into working on Indie Hackers was that there's an entire class of things that I need to get done. But if the question I'm asking myself at every moment is what do I most want to do, like those things just never come up. They're never the answer. Like I never wanted to like write a newsletter. I never want to like fill out like, accounting forms. How do you deal with all that kind of stuff when you're sort of living every day doing what you want?
Yeah. To be honest, I think I try to eliminate as much as possible the things that I don't want to do. It's not always possible, obviously. I have to file my tax returns every April and so on and so forth. Nobody's going to get, no, it's not going to do itself. But the things that I have an option to not do, even if it comes at the cost of leaving money on the table, leaving opportunity on the table. I think really hard whether I should take them. Sometimes I do take them. Sometimes, and we can talk about something that I chose to do. I started working a little bit part-time with Gumroad, which I've sort of committed to, taking a little bit of commitment, but for some rewards, of part of it financially and part of it other things. So it's not I'm completely against entering any obligations, but I'm extremely careful. And you mentioned newsletters, like it's something that I've talked about a lot, whether free newsletters or paid newsletters. It's initially I thought I will enjoy writing a newsletter, every week. But when I found myself trying to do that, right, I realized that I have nothing to say, and I don't want to sort of sort of put content on a schedule, right, and sort of force myself to do that. So I chose not to do it, and I'm very likely missing out on many things in that case and in many other cases that I'm doing. So basically, I think the if I try to summarize the approach is I try to optimize for enjoyment and things that are sort of that I feel like I would do anyway for their own sake, as soon as I can afford it, right, or whenever I can afford it. There are definitely exceptions where I have to do something because it has to be done. But I try to, if I can eliminate them or I can reduce them, I try to.
If I had to put it in a sentence, it's that you've switched from a life where you're exchanging your freedom and happiness to make more money to a life where you're exchanging your money to get more freedom and happiness.
Yeah, I think there's a bit more to it, right? Because I think that there's always this balance of how much do you sacrifice in the present sort of for a better future. And sort of, I think probably the simplest way to describe it right now for me is that I'm trying to do the minimum possible to have long-term peace of mind. So I'm still keeping an outlook on the future. I'm not just trying to live, to spend everything I have right now just to extract everything in the present, and then in the future I'll have nothing. But I'm trying to do the minimum possible there, right? So basically, I'm trying to save the minimum possible, sort of invest and so on and so forth, the minimum possible. I'm not trying to maximize everything there. Quite the opposite. Just so that I know I have enough buffer. So if something happens, if the next COVID happens, again, or some other thing that nobody can predict, or the economy crashes or whatever, I'll have enough buffer to sort of be able to recover from it, and then optimize for the present, right? I'm not a big fan of the deferred lifestyle, right, where you're just sacrificing almost 100% or a huge part of your life for in the present, right, just for the promise of living it sometime in the future, 10, 20, 30 years from now. So that's sort of a little bit how I'm taking it. Obviously, it's a bit easier said than done. Sometimes it's a bit nebulous. How do you decide? In terms of how to use your resources, time, money, attention, and so on and so forth. But it's sort of my framework of how to try to decide.
So let's go back to the beginning where this all started for you, which is, as you said, you're pretty bored with your job at Amazon and you didn't like the lifestyle that it gave you. And it's pretty remarkable to see like what you decided to give up when you quit, because you started at Amazon making like $75K a year, and you worked there for like 8 or 9 years and got all the way to the point where you're making over $500,000 a year at Amazon with great coworkers, like a lot of recognition. Like you're having it's pretty much as good as it gets working a job for somebody else. How do you quit something like that, and how do you feel giving that up?
No, I'll admit that when I sent my notice, I had a little bit of cramps in my stomach. Like, what have I done? Because it's hard to look at all the stock that I had sort of vesting in the next couple of years, and leave it there on the table. But I think I had been preparing myself mentally. Basically, I think the way I managed to give up is I convinced myself that I've written off that chapter in my life. I've lived it. I was happy that it happened. It definitely helped me financially. But I was completely happy to just give it up, and not even, because many people that I've seen, sometimes taking a sabbatical or sort of taking a year of work and whatever, typically leave with the expectation that they're going to go back. And, you can never say never. Who knows, what could happen. But I left with the expectation that this is completely, I completely abandoned that career for me. Right. So it's all just, mentally realizing that wasn't improving my lifestyle. And I had already realized that if I'm working and my lifestyle is not improving, I mean, what's the point? Right.
Explain to me this philosophy of like writing off a chapter of your life, because it sounds like another philosophy I've read about, just about, I think it's called like future authoring, where you're kind of like looking at your life as a book and yourself as the main character in the book. And when you take that viewpoint, you just decide to make much more interesting decisions than if you have like, the normal first person sort of point of view where you're going to be very risk averse, etc. Is that how you were like viewing your life at the time? Like you were a character in a book and this was just a chapter?
I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen myself as a character in the book, although what you just said sort of resonates a bit with me in terms of sometimes when people ask me, like, what's your definition of a good life, or what are you trying to do? And probably I think that the best description that I like is a life is just a good story that you're proud of, right? It's basically, I think the only thing we really control is how we react to things, right? And what decisions we make. It's just something that I want to, I think that being satisfied with your life is just looking back and saying, I reacted properly, right? Or reacted in the best way that I could have. And I'm proud about how the way I reacted, obviously, because you could react in very, very different ways. But in terms of writing it off, I think it's more just a way of, I think it's a philosophy that I heard from the Stoics and the ancient Stoics, Greeks and Romans sort of talk about. I think Seneca talks about this a lot in terms of it's healthy. They believed to occasionally give up almost all things that you have sort of accumulated in your life, And I think something in between of actually giving it up is just sometimes just mentally giving it up, like mentally writing it off, just assuming that it's gone, and living your life in a way that you're not trying to make sure that you're keeping that option open, that you're going to recover it. It's just a way, I think, of helping you sometimes take the plunge and sort of not keep regretting what you're leaving by. Because I'll admit that sometimes it's harder to leave a good situation, a decent situation, to try to improve something. Because if my situation was terrible, it would have probably prompted me to just leave earlier, right, and leave with absolutely no regrets. So I definitely understand that.
Seneca has a great
but,
quote that
yeah.
we suffer more from imagination than reality. And it seems to apply here too, where you're just thinking about, oh, I gave this up and I could have had that, but that's like all in your head. And the reality is, I'm sure when you quit, like things are still fine for you.
No, absolutely. But I think a few things. Basically, I think what happened to me was, actually, to be honest, I think imagination a little bit helped me as well, because I started, the way things happened, my finances improved radically in like a very short period of time, and even my sort of career status. Within the sort of 5 years, I joined as a junior, I was a senior, sort of my compensation more than increased 5 times. And I like the period 5 years before, it was still fresh in my memory. And I started reflecting, like how different was my life back then. Sure, I had a smaller house, had a smaller car, had fewer material possessions. I used to think a bit harder before upgrading my laptop and my phone and whatever. But is that really it? I mean, how much sacrifice? How many things am I going to trade sort of for this small improvement? Basically, I think, don't get me wrong, like I think money improves lifestyle significantly, but I think there's extreme diminishing returns after you exceed a certain point. And basically, I think once you end up in the situation where you're sort of trapped into this lifestyle where everything around you is just focused and optimized for climbing up the career ladder, keep getting promoted. Like it's literally the rat race, sort of how I described it. I never really thought about it that way when I was there. Like I used to think it's something else, but now that I'm out, it's sort of how I see it. That you're just there, and the environment just forces you to just keep pushing, keep competing, keep like every day you're being asked, what can you do better? What can you keep improving? But then if you step back and look outside, this is it, right? I think nowadays, even now that I'm working for myself, pretty much every time I ask myself, if this is not improving my life, what's the point, right? And go even back to the newsletter, right? Or something like any other commitment. And if I find myself that I'm doing something, sort of I'm forcing myself to do it, I question it. Like, what's the point? Is it going to materially improve my life? Are the odds very high that's going to sort of make a significant difference? If not, I tend to just give up on it.
So you're at this point where you've quit your job, your $500,000 a year salary is gone, but you've got 5 years of runway, but probably your family and your coworkers all think you're crazy. What's the first thing you do when you're in that situation?
Yeah, it's true, right? Many people thought I was crazy, family and friends. I think nothing, to be honest. I think I don't really have a good answer. I think sort of sometimes when you're in these sort of casual conversations, it's a bit uncomfortable to describe what you're doing. Like I remember, I think a couple of weeks later, I went to the dentist. He asked me, "Are you still at Amazon?" I said, "No, what are you doing?" And I didn't know what to respond. Like I'm just exploring. So sometimes I think it helps to prepare yourself to have a good sort of canned response to give in casual conversations. I think with family and friends, when you have the opportunity to describe better, I think people start to get it. And this is what happened when I was explaining it to my colleagues at Amazon in the last week when I told them I was leaving. It was funny because I booked, I think, a 15-minute meeting with everyone, expecting that I was just going to tell them I'm leaving. And many of these conversations ended up taking like 3 hours, like we were there until 8 at night, because people were fascinated. And then we started talking, and many people had sort of similar thoughts, and they started to realize similar things. So I think people understand it once you start explaining, as we're talking about it over it here. It's a bit harder when you just sort of in a party and you have to describe what you're doing.
Did you have like a solid plan for like how you're going to achieve like the goals that you wanted to achieve, or what your first steps were going to be?
Yeah, so I had a plan which ended up being, in hindsight, I think a mistake. Like I had a nice spreadsheet where I pretty much started with my savings balance and my sort of expense rate, and sort of I knew the sort of the downward slope, and basically I had a series of plans, and that in my head were sort of the ideal things that I would be doing. And for example, my first preference was to build a SaaS business, right, and go that route. And then basically I thought if that didn't work out, I might try to do an info product, try to write a book. And if that didn't work out, I thought I might do some freelancing. Then the next step was I might try to acquire maybe a small business. Like there's this market of online businesses that sell for maybe $100,000 to $100,000, and I might try to run it. And I had a couple of other things that I'm forgetting. But sort of I had like on my savings balance, I had like red lines that if I drop below this line, I'll trigger plan B, right, and plan C. And I started for the first 6 months with sort of that assumption that that's how I was going to work. But then I think about 6 months in, I had a bit of a small crisis. I remember like I was feeling that even though I was executing on plan A, basically all the uncertainty that came with not knowing whether something is going to succeed or fail, or even what does success or fail mean, right? What if something is working, but it's still it's growing slowly? What if something appears that it's going to require a lot of time? How will I decide to pull the trigger and sort of pivot to plan B? And sort of all that uncertainty about it being very hard to even decide started making me extremely uncomfortable, literally keeping me up at night. Like it's literally the subconscious nagging you. I think there's something in our head that sort of tries to prevent us from taking imprudent risks and sort of risking things that are detrimental to our survival. And and this, I think, was fully active at that time, like sort of pinging me to question what I was doing. And I think I'm happy that I listened to it, that I didn't try to suppress it, because I think it opened my eyes to a different approach that now I believe it's significantly more preferable. I think it significantly helps tame the uncertainty when you're into this type of venture. And believe it or not, I'm liking it. I'm liking it more. And basically, this is the idea that instead of doing things in series, like instead of trying 100% focus on one thing, when it fails, you go to plan B. It's just to try to do all of them together, essentially. I try to do many different things together at the cost of some efficiency and some focus, but trying to employ the 80-20 rule and sort of, again, like trying to eliminate what's the details and just focus on the most important things. And basically, the very first thing I tried to do when I realized that I needed to do this was I went to look out a little bit for some freelancing work. And I happened to be lucky. I had a friend who was living close by, had a startup and needed some help. And we agreed that I'll be taking about 20 hours a month, like just a tiny amount. I was just going to spend 2-3 days a month. I'll pick up a couple of tasks from buried backlog, and I'll just help develop them for them. And this immediately helped me. Like it was something very clear in my psychology, how much it helped, even though it was just an extra $1,000-$2,000 a month in income, which was nowhere close to even sort of paying all my bills or being sort of sufficient. But basically, I realized that before I was just relying on the idea that if things don't work out, I could always go find some freelancing. But it's much, much different if you're already doing a little bit right now, right? I mean, the difference from thinking you can do it from actually I'm doing it, and if I want to, I can do more of it. There's a significant difference. So I was so happy that I was sort of being able to, that I found this so much peace of mind with just this small change, that then I realized that why don't I try something else, maybe a few more things. And my plan B was to try to write an info product. I had already, or like an ebook, or create, share some knowledge that I have in terms of a product. And I said, okay, let me see. I mean, what are some low-hanging fruits? Like, what is something that I know really well that maybe I could market myself? We can talk about the topic of building an audience, but by the time I had a little bit of a Twitter following, I had about 10,000 followers. I had been tweeting mostly technical stuff at the time, and people seemed to be interested in what I had to say. And I said, okay, I know a lot about AWS. I worked there for like 8 years. I had been using it 2 years before. I thought I had an interesting perspective on how to simplify this daunting topic with lots of moving parts. And I decided to write a very short ebook. Like I allocated a month. It ended up taking even less than that. And sort of I put it out there. We can talk more about this, but it turned out to be one of my most sort of successful things in terms of financial outcomes. It made over $100,000, just that book. And then I ended up doing another info product, which did another 150K. But sort of I discovered not only that I enjoy creating info products, I enjoy marketing them, talking about them, I enjoy the whole creator economy. It helped me financially as well. It's something that I now realize it's something I could at least make a living out of it, very likely. It added all this. It helped me in multiple ways. Like, as we were talking about before, it helps in peace of mind, taming uncertainty. Basically, when you're doing multiple things, sometimes you get a win from one thing, sometimes the next day you get a win from some other thing. Like, it sort of smooths out the sort of spiky nature of this business. The other thing that was really fascinating was that it felt like it worked even better for me to find motivation. I think no matter how much we like to do something, you always at some point, you want a break. And sort of having multiple things going on at the same time just allows you to just shift attention to something else. And sort of if you feel, whenever I feel like, I've done enough of this, I can shift attention to just, do some promotion for products, or maybe start working on a new one, or, do something else, right? Or explore some new ideas, right? It's really helping me for sort of finding almost free energy to keep doing things.
Let's talk about the period before you had this insight, before you realized that like an info product might be the way to go, because there are a lot of people who are kind of lost at sea. They've quit their jobs, or maybe they're working on the side, and they're not like sure what to work on or how to even learn from the things that they're doing. And one of the things I think is interesting about your story is like you tried a lot of stuff, and I think you're particularly effective at learning from the things that you tried that maybe didn't succeed as well as you wanted, or even that like surprised you and did surprisingly well. For example, like you did a lot of writing early after quitting your job, and you worked on like these little projects. Like you got one called S3 Benchmark and one called Bootstrapping Calculator. So walk me through like this first 6-month period of like what you were thinking, what you were trying, and what the results of those experiments were.
So I think something that I definitely I think I did very, very well in the beginning, which again wasn't necessarily planned, but I managed to figure it out pretty much in the very first week, as I was on my own. I was sitting here on my desk like literally the first Monday as a self-employed person, and initially I think my very first thought that I was going to be prototyping some software products, like to sort of be building something and just putting it out there. And very, very quickly, I realized I started using my imagination. Another case where I think my imagination helped me a bit. That I imagined myself spending, 6 months or whatever, right, building something, and then I put it out there, share it on Hacker News, share it on Reddit, and nobody upvotes it and nobody sees it, right? And then now what, right? I mean, what will I do? And that was quite daunting, right? So I think I started to realize that I probably, not only it was daunting, but it was demotivating as well, right? Because I could imagine myself being very demotivated if that happened. Like it could probably have prompted me to go back to full-time employment, right? Very easy for that to happen. So I think I changed my attitude in a little bit, and I really started to try to figure out the probability of what I was. I really believe it's really important, and I think people tend to undervalue and be sometimes overly optimistic sometimes, right? And sort of factoring in the probability of something working. I mean, sure, failure, you can learn from it. But to be honest, I think sometimes we try to sort of, I think, give too much value to failure. I think failure is very expensive. Full-blown failure, like spending a year or something working on something, is a very expensive way of learning a lesson. So, long story short, I think basically the first thing I realized that was against me in trying to make a living on my own is that pretty much nobody knew about me outside of the companies that I had worked on in the past. And since pretty much for the last decade almost, I had just worked in a single company, I was pretty much unknown to the world. So I became extremely determined to try to make myself known a little bit. And it was something that I had never really done, I had no social media experience. Even the concept of building an audience was something that I didn't really understand. So I started thinking, like, what can I do? Like, what can I do to sort of, for people to start to recognize myself, so that when I have something to offer, people will have a reason to trust me, right? To see what I'm putting out there, and so on and so forth. Initially, I started wondering whether I should maybe build an open source project and sort of use that route to get myself known a little bit. But then I don't really remember exactly how it happened, but I thought maybe the best thing to do might be to start writing something. And I started thinking about what can I write about. And the very first thing one of the first things I thought about was just what we talked about just a few minutes ago, right? The fact that when I was telling my colleagues why I was leaving, sort of a career that was working very well by every traditional measure, my colleagues were extremely interested, right? And they were sort of very fascinated. And I thought if it was fascinating for like those 10 people, maybe people on the internet might find it interesting as well. So I said, let's give it a try. And that was sort of my first attempt at sort of putting something out there and building an audience. This is what sort of it ended up being. So I wrote this blog post. It was called Only Intrinsic Motivation Lasts, why I left a 500K job to work for myself. I shared it on the usual places, even on the Hackers, which did really well, and Reddit and Hacker News. And it got me my first I think it got me my first 1,500 followers, which basically were people that were interested. Sometimes they were just curious about what I would be doing next, or they aspired to do something different, right? And they wanted to learn more. I invited people to ask me questions, and I started answering. I remember I got probably over 100 DMs and email that day, right after after that blog post, and it opened my eyes that I can probably continue to do more of this, right? And that's pretty much how I spent almost all of 2019. Probably it was my main focus. Just pretty much I'm rearranging my life, I'm changing some of my lifestyle, I'm sort of setting up a new business, I'm brainstorming ideas, and I was just documenting these. Even some of the most mundane things, like opening up a business checking account and sort of figuring these things out, I was tweeting about them, and I was seeing people liking them, right? Again, like asking questions and sort of helping. And slowly but surely, it attracted, I think so I started in February with 100 followers on Twitter and no other social media experience. And I think by October, I had over 10,000. It was probably, I think it probably still is. It's probably one of my biggest assets right now, right? Just because it gives me tons of optionality. It's probably my market research arm. People tell me what they're interested in. It definitely takes part of my time. It's probably one of my bets as well in my portfolio. I spend hours a day just answering questions and putting out content and doing things like that. So
what's striking to me about this first story about you noticing that your coworkers were very intrigued by you quitting, and that maybe other people would read about it, is that you're not the first person to do this. A lot of people have written posts about how I quit my job and decided to be an indie hacker, and not all of them ended up with people getting thousands of followers and hundreds of direct messages. So what do you think it was about your particular post that resonated so well?
I think I'll be completely honest. I think probably something resonated. It's hard for me to know what it is, but it's sure something resonated because that post was seen over 200,000 times in total since then. I don't know. I don't know if I can go. I tried to write other posts which didn't do as well. But I think what I will say, what I think people can take away from this is that I basically that got me my first 1,500 followers, right? Which for me to get the other 46,000, I had to do other things, right? And the other things, again, like this is very hard to predict what exactly will work. And sometimes I post a tweet and it goes viral and gets me 1,000 followers. I still think it's almost completely impossible, almost impossible to predict whether something will do well or not. So I think it's more like I think what really helped me was the determination, right? I really wanted to look at what I had in me, in my head, on my computer. Like you mentioned that bootstrapping calculator. That was literally a spreadsheet, one of the spreadsheets that I was talking about, that I had on my laptop. And I was looking at it one day, like just to make sure that I was still tracking the line that I projected. And I thought, well, maybe this might be interesting to other people. Literally, I uploaded it to GitHub. I shared it on Hacker News on a Sunday, I think at 2 a.m. My kid was sick and was sort of, I couldn't sleep, and like it went on the front page. I think Elon Musk had just docked with the space station, and I was ranking up above him, which is quite crazy when you think about it. But
yeah.
And I'll admit, like I shared probably dozens other things that went nowhere, like which I thought I had the same attitude to them. But I think it's just this system of looking at yourself, looking at what you have in you, what experiences you've run through, what you're learning, and just sharing them. I think something that I'm doing well, that I see sometimes people doing suboptimally, is that I try, again, like it's just trying to employ the 80-20 rule. I really don't obsess too much about optimizing the piece, search engine optimization, picking up the best title, even timing. Like I never really try to time my tweets or whatever. As soon as inspiration strikes, I try to literally do it, share it, and get rid of it, right? And I think it just helps me to, first of all, it's just easier for me. Like I don't try to spend too much time on things; it just starts to feel unpleasant. But also to just keep the flow going without necessarily, I think, forcing myself. It's just when something really happens and I notice it might be interesting to others, I tend to just share it. I got better at it. Like I'll admit, like in the beginning, I used to have to sit down and think what happened today that might be interesting to share. Nowadays, I literally just encounter things and they just tweet about them immediately. which is, I think, is why Twitter became my platform of choice. Like I rarely write long form anymore. I do it occasionally, maybe once every 2 months when I have something that doesn't really fit in a tweet. But I think just Twitter is just perfect for my way of sharing and documenting my journey, because it just updates in real time, that I think I can just condense them to sort of these sort of short snippets that are just very easy to consume.
Well, looking at like a lot of the writing that you've done, it seems like you're super good at it. And maybe it's like I'm only seeing the stuff that succeeds and I'm not seeing the stuff that doesn't take off. But just like, for example, your posts on indie hackers, when I look at how much engagement they've gotten, like your latest post, how I made $210,000 selling a PDF and a video on the internet, it has 193 upvotes, 9,000 views on indie hackers. Your earlier post always got like 50 upvotes, 30 upvotes, 3,000 views, 2,000 views. And there are a ton of people who are trying to post helpful, interesting things on indie hackers who aren't getting even a fraction of the upvotes and the views that you're getting. And so I think it's worth, just trying to brainstorm and think about, why are these posts so interesting to people? Why do they resonate?
I think probably one thing that definitely people like seeing. So I think the general answer to this, and we'll go into a specific thing, but I think the general answer to this is that, and you hear this advice lots of times, it's not something new, but I try to share details that I wish I had when I was starting out, right? And I started to realize that some of the most inspiring details tend to be financial details. I think people are extremely curious about, especially about a non-traditional way of making a living. especially in the indie hackers community, probably, right? But even other places, even on Hacker News, even on various subreddits, even in real life, right? If you were to talk with people and share compensation and say personal finances, you notice, right, that people are extremely curious because it's not something that tends to be shared a lot. And I think I don't know, something in me, and I've been doing this, I think, since I was 17, 18 years old. Like, I mean, I was always talking about my income and my finances. It was something with friends. It's something that I feel comfortable about it. Like, even when I was at Amazon, I used to share how much I'm doing. I mean, with small groups, not publicly, but one-on-ones with people to try to encourage them, to ask for raises and things like that. And I had always noticed that it's something that people really value. Oh, wow, you're sharing all this stuff with me. So I think if I were to generalize the idea a little bit, I think if you manage to manage to make yourself comfortable sharing things that tend to be rarely shared, I think you get an extreme advantage. You don't necessarily need to do this. Like, there's many other people who manage to build an audience without really sharing anything that others might find maybe sensitive to share. But I think it's very likely, for example, that post that you mentioned, that where I sort of try to do this still how I managed to promote my info products, and sort of pretty much I broke down every dollar where it came from. I think all the financial information, like all the details, all the promotion campaigns that I tried, and sort of pretty much sharing screenshots from my spreadsheet. I think just people really value that. But it's basically, I think I don't want people to take away that you have to sort of show your financial information. But I think it's a good sort of framework to think about it. Do I have something in me that is rarely shared that people will appreciate it, right? It will help them. That's basically what you want to do, right? I mean, the reason financial details help in this case because it opens people's eyes of, okay, here's one way to do it, right? Or here's one approach that worked. It doesn't necessarily, everyone knows that there might be survivorship bias, and you're just seeing maybe a success story. But even with that, like, I mean, I think people realize, I mean, you could actually self-publish an ebook today with 10,000 followers and make $100,000, right? I mean, 2 years ago, I didn't know this was even possible. I used to think that technical writers make $10,000 if they're lucky, $20,000, and they go to like 2 years of grueling work, working with a publisher and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think that's probably something that an example, at least one example, that really helps engagement.
I think numbers are always engaging because there's just such an intense competition for attention and readers nowadays. Like, if you're just writing the same thing everyone else is writing and you're not sharing things that are rarely shared or that are super valuable, then like no one's going to read it. And the numbers don't have to necessarily be financial. They just have to be relevant to like whatever success you've had. So if you're talking about writing a book, like you could talk about, how many copies you've sold without revealing the numbers. So if you're talking about like doing search engine optimization, you could talk about how many page views or users are getting from Google. And I think in the absence of those numbers, it's hard for anyone who's reading to actually take any value away from what you've written, because it's like, well, this person's giving me tips, but like, how successful are these tips going to make me exactly? Am I going to get 1 million visitors? Am I going to get 100,000 visitors? But when you actually go the extra distance and like include that information, then you're being transparent in a way that's super valuable to others. And, to this day, I get emails and DMs from people who say, why should I be transparent? Everybody's sharing all these numbers, whatever. Why should I do it? And like, this is the exact answer, because if you care about actually giving value to your readers, like, you need to share something with them that's going to inspire them and like give them some context. And like, you're very consistently good at doing that. It's almost in every single thing that you do, you figure out like, what is the number that you need to share that actually resonates with people. And I've realized the same thing with indie hackers as well. Like, all of our interviews are transparent. We share revenue numbers, and it just resonates with people who are actually trying to be practitioners and learn how to do the thing.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think there's so much lack of clarity about what it means, like what it means to start something new. I mean, what do the first 12 months look like? That I think it's just looking at even just anecdotal examples is just extremely useful, even knowing that you're not just necessarily seeing the full picture and whatever. That is just super inspiring. And basically, that's what I try to do. And I try to caveat because again, like whenever I share on Twitter, so for example, like I can't guarantee that this is predictable. That is typically one of the first things I say. Probably even if I were to go myself back in time and do the exact same things, I might not get the exact results. Might be less, might be more. So this type of work has that property. Nevertheless, I think there's still lots of value in just sharing how things turned out. Right? It just opens people's eyes and just helps people calibrate themselves about sort of what the odds are for them. Because actually, and this is what happened to me, right? I looked at other creators that were sharing sort of some knowledge they had. Adam, for example, you had him on the podcast from Tailwind, the factoring UI, and all the other great things he does. When I bought one of his books, sort of, it was really, really interesting. I liked the format, that it was not filled with fluff. It was pretty much just a brain dump with light editing. Seemed like in a Word doc, save as PDF, and you put it online for sale. You ask $25 for it. I was a happy customer. It was $25 worth spent, or how much it was. And I think just that experience inspired me, and basically learning that he did very well with it as well. He made 6 figures and now much more. Sort of inspired me to consider it as an option for me. It wasn't necessarily something that I forced myself to do, but when I was evaluating what do I have, what options do I have, like that became a very viable candidate.
There's this equation by BJ Fogg as to what gets people to engage in behavior. And it's B equals MAT. So behavior equals motivation plus ability plus trigger. Motivation is, hey, look how much money I'm making for my ebook, which people are like, oh, wow, I want to make that much money from an ebook. Ability is like when you, in your posts and your guides, you go into like describing how to do this. And then people feel the confidence that, oh, I could do this too. So now they have the motivation and the ability. And then like the trigger, like some sort of call to action. Like here's the very first step you should take, or here's some life change, that you could, quit your job, or you can, go freelance, or just some way to actually get the ball rolling, because that's often the hardest step. Yeah. But once you get all 3 of those together, I think people tend to take action. When people take action, then they share, hey, I read, Daniel Vassallo's thing, and it made me like change my life. I read Adam Wadden's like tweets, and it changed my life. And that, I think, is super valuable. And you seem to like cover all those spaces.
I love that. Yeah, I never thought about it that way, but it makes perfect sense.
So at some point, you hit on the fact that, just writing these blog posts about what you're doing and these tweets about what you're doing is working really well. And you create an ebook, The Good Parts of AWS, and that works really well. You make, over $100,000 and not very much time. What's interesting here is that I think a lot of people, when they're trying to figure out what to do, follow this kind of explore, exploit algorithm where it's like, well, let me try a bunch of different things. And then once I hit on something that works, I'm just going to like press the gas pedal on that and just keep doing that. Whereas you took a different approach. You realize that like, hey, writing an ebook is like a really great way to take advantage of my audience and like the goodwill that I've built and the trust that I've generated, and to like make a lot of money. Like maybe this is the approach, but you didn't just like stop working on your other projects. Like you didn't shut down your SaaS application and go 100% on that. Why not?
Yeah, it's a very common question, and right now, I'm treating everything as I'm treating this arrangement as I'm not treating it as temporary. Let me put it that way. I'm not thinking that I'm doing these just waiting until something picks up and just go full attention on it. The reasons I think are various. One of them, I think, is as I explained before, I'm just enjoying it better right now. I think my life would some value from my life would diminish if I just had one thing instead of 4 things, right? Or how many there are. Another part is also, we touched on it before as well, is sort of part strategic, part financial. It's sort of this mix of it's basically diversification, like in investment terms, like you're basically having not all your eggs in one basket. I think it just helps tame the unpredictability and uncertainty of different things. I think even if something is showing much more promise than others, it just helps to know that there's some other thing. Like even if that, I think it's just even the attitude changes. The fact that that if there's some threat, right, or there's some sort of something that might sort of an existential threat to your main business, you know that you have something else going on. Is just, I think, reassuring. Part of it is motivation as well, as we talked about it before. Again, like it's just good to have something else to do. And to be honest, this is something that I've noticed many other successful business people do, even outside of tech, right? I mean, it's very common for people to have, a main business, and then, they join a board of directors at another company, even if they're doing it almost for free, right? And they join other things. I think it's something that people tend to do, and is not very often noticed, right? And I think I'd rather have sort of things going on that I'm sort of have control over them myself, right? Rather than just join other things. Like, even if you look at celebrities, like you can look at Mark Cuban, right? Who's like a billionaire. Like, why does he go on Shark Tank and like do investments in like small businesses? Who know? Like, I don't know him, right? Who knows? But I suspect part of it is just it's fun, right? It's sort of it enhances your life to have a few other things going on, right? You can look at this thing. It's just you enjoy it, and I'm definitely not that extreme. I think probably my life would suffer if I had like hundreds of different things. I think there's a smaller balance. But yeah, right now that's how I'm organizing my life. Like just building a portfolio of things that I enjoy doing, that I think they have potential and high odds of continuing to succeed. Maybe 5 years from now, maybe something is going so much well that I will change my mind. Like I'm not sort of committing that this is, but it's part of the discovery, right? And right now, sort of this seems to be my ideal arrangement.
I mean, this aligns with what you left as a comment on Indie Hackers a couple years ago, that you're doing this because you want to work on your own terms and do whatever motivates you. And I think it's hard to do when you're working for somebody else. Like it's, especially in like a huge company like Amazon, you're more likely to be pigeonholed into a very particular cog in this whole machine. If you're a software engineer, you're going to spend like 99% of your time coding. Whereas when I talk to founders and people who've created their own sort of lifestyle as a result of their business, it turns out they have like all these little hobbies where they can do like 4 or 5 things. Like if I look at my life with Indie Hackers, usually Monday, Tuesday, some of Wednesday, I'm doing podcast stuff. And it turns out it's like really fun to have a podcast, to get to meet people and talk to them and like research what's going on in their lives. But then like the rest of the week, I might have days where I'm writing, or days where I'm managing like my team, or days where I'm like spend a lot of time coding and designing. And, people have asked me like, oh, what are you going to do when you get bored of Indie Hackers? And it's like, well, I don't know. I don't see a future in which I get bored of doing like all these different things that I like to do. And I have like the ability to just shuffle them in and out whenever I feel like it. It's really hard to imagine getting tired of that lifestyle.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree.
So you've also worked on, one of these other things you've worked on is a SaaS application called Userbase. And in my experience, it's very hard to build a successful SaaS, especially as a solo founder. A lot of the fears that you had earlier on, which is like, what if I work on this for 6 months and it doesn't work out, are totally justified, because that happens all the time. There's just so much more work that needs to go into a SaaS compared to an info product or an ebook or something. And you just get less feedback along the way, unless you can find like super clever ways to just like build these like tiny minimum viable products. Give me like an overview of the story behind Userbase and how it's going.
Yeah, it was. So Userbase emerged when I was still in the mode of believing that I was going to focus on one thing. And at the time, I thought that it was probably the most, my best bet, right, to sort of work on something that I understood well. Sort of, I came from a background of working in sort of databases and tools for developers, and this was sort of a combination of that. And I enjoyed the space. In hindsight, I think I ended up investing a lot more time, a lot more money into it than I would have liked. Nevertheless, sort of the arrangement that I managed to do later, it allowed me to let it take its time, essentially. Right? I mean, I'm still happy that I managed to build it in a very lean way. It's already profitable, even though it just has I think only about 100 paid customers. sort of just break even profitable. I'm not doing anything significant. Just I think we just crossed over $500 in MRR, so it's still very, very early days. But I think it's something that I can leave. I can leave there just with minor and sort of basically with the option of me spending more time on it, but not the obligation. And basically, more time is beneficial to it. Like I mean, the future can only bring positive outcomes to this business, right? I mean, it's sort of it's breaking even, right? And it almost can only succeed slowly, right? It almost cannot fail. I mean, sure, I mean it could fail, right, if all the customers go away forever. But I like that I managed to position it in such a way that okay, it's only doing $500 a month. It's nothing significant right now, but it's possible that in 5 years, 6 years, it could become a six-figure dollar per year business, right? And if that were to happen, I think it would have been worth it, even all the investment that I've put into it.
So what is it exactly? Like, what's the idea behind Userbase?
So the idea started, I was exploring some ideas about building end-to-end encrypted web apps. Right, imagine a productivity app where all the data that users put would end up being end-to-end encrypted with keys generated from the user's password, such that the server would never see it. It's sort of a way to both improve the privacy of the user data as well as sort of spares the developer and the sort of web app owner from all the liability of dealing with user data, and clear helps compliance aspects and so on and so forth. So at first I was thinking of building a web app like that, and I thought maybe why don't I build just the framework for it? And this is pretty much what it is. It's close to Firebase, like in terms of concept. I think you use Firebase for in the hacker side. So it's basically like Firebase, where you have an authentication API and like a database API for storing stuff. But I think the sort of the special ingredient, the special feature is this end-to-end encrypted feature. It's a super niche place. We rank really, really high when you search for end-to-end encrypted web apps and things like that on Google and in other places. It did well on Product Hunt. We got a good boost on launch. But I think one of the biggest challenge, I get about 10, 15 signups every day. The biggest challenge is that there's an extremely long lead time from when people, sign up and try the demo and play a bit with it, and then and then they arrive to a point where they need to build a production app, and they end up sort of taking the wallet out of their pocket to pay like the $50 per year. It's extremely cheap as well, right? It's just not expensive compared to hosting your own servers or whatever. So that's one of the I think defects of this business model that I've sort of underestimated a little bit, right? That if I were to go back, basically I'll admit probably I'll find something smaller. I think that would better fit my smaller bets, something with a shorter feedback loop that didn't require lots of investment. Basically, I ended up having to hire somebody to help me as well, because it turned out to be more complicated than I thought, right? So I wouldn't say it's a mistake. Right now I like the situation where it is right now, and I'm going to keep investing my time just trying to keep promote it and improve the product. And again, like, it's all upside from here, but it sort of violates a little bit my criteria that I've defined right now of smaller bets, especially in the beginning, right? I think if I was much more, if my arrangement was much more sustainable, I think these kinds of bets become much more okay, right, in my strategy. But in the beginning, I would rather go with smaller, low-hanging fruit that are more likely to succeed faster, even at a lower upside potential.
I like the way you're describing these as bets, and that you have like multiple bets that are out there, and any of them could pay off, right? You've got a couple different ebooks, you've got Userbase, which is still going strong and is apparently profitable. And I think in the same way, like with Indie Hackers, I have 3 or 4 different bets that might be, we've got this giant directory of products, and there's like 12,000 products in there. And like, there's a lot I could do with that, but it's kind of on the back burner at the moment. We've got the forum and the podcast and our newsletter, and it just feels a lot less risky when you have many things going on at the same time. even though that might detract a little bit from your focus, like some of these things can just sustain themselves. It sounds like Userbase is basically running itself. And the fact that you haven't adopted this serial mindset, or you kind of like left behind the serial mindset where you have to do one thing at a time and then shut it down when it's over, really is to your advantage, because
there's no
now
need
it's
to
like,
shut it down. Yeah,
exactly. And like maybe 5 years from now, there'll be this huge success story about how Userbase is crushing it and it's an overnight success. But the reality is, like, it's not an overnight success. You just left it, 5 years ago, and you let it, people go through this process of figuring out whether or not they wanted to use it, and they become heavier users, et cetera. You can come back to it. So I love the idea that you've built this thing, set it aside without shutting it down, and now you're doing, a lot of other stuff that seems to be more immediately profitable.
Absolutely. I think I think you could see time as your enemy and time as your friend, right? I think if you're in a mode where you have a finite runway and you need to get something to work, time is essentially your enemy, right? Every second that ticks, you're getting you closer to running out of money or resources or whatever. Because I think if you manage to put these bets where time is your friend, right? Basically, every second that comes, this could just bring a new customer, and or somebody influential mentions it, right? Or something happens, and I think it's preferable. You can't always do this, right? But I think it's preferable to place bets that in such a way where time is your friend, right? Just time exposes you to upside only. It's because either your costs are covered or they're very small that you can just bear them forever or almost forever.
So time is clearly your friend with everything you're working on, and also like the learnings that you're sort of accumulating by blogging, publishing ebooks, learning lessons from your SaaS applications. And I think, from the outside looking in, one of the biggest culminations of all this learning you're doing is your most recent ebook about everybody being able to build an audience on Twitter. And one of the cool numbers, we talked about numbers earlier and just being transparent. One of the cool numbers you've shared about your ebooks is not just how much money they make, but also how many hours you put into writing these things. And with like your first ebook, I think it was something like 160 hours that it took you to write it. And then with your book about building an audience on Twitter, it was like 16 hours that you just blew through and wrote this thing super quick. And it's also made just a ton of money. I think I did the calculation. If you $211,000 is what you've made over the last year or so from your books. And you've basically, I think, put in like 170 hours or something. And so you're basically getting paid $1,200 an hour, which is nuts. It's absolutely nuts. How are you able to put out a book that was so successful in so little time?
Yeah. One clarification, which is important, and I did this intentionally. It's actually not a book, right? It's actually a video course. So actually what I did this intentionally. In fact, I was going to do an ebook, a traditional ebook at first. But I was wondering, I really want to test the idea of going even more extreme in terms of ROI. And when you write a book, I think it's actually really hard to do it in 3 days. I can barely write a blog post in 3 days, right? So there's always some editing and we need to find the right words. So I thought maybe the best way for me to do this presentation, it's like I'm just recording a talk at a conference, So I pretty much on a Friday, I prepared a few slides. on the next day, on the Saturday, I pretty much started ScreenFlow, recorded myself talking over the slides for an hour and a half. And then I spent the next day just, preparing the cover on Gumroad and setting the price, setting the description. And that was it, right? And I shared it on Twitter. It sort of did $50,000 in the first week. And it's still doing $400, $500 a day.
Crazy.
We released it in April, it's 6 months. But I think, and this was, again, this was something, the inspiration came from seeing another creator, somebody completely outside of tech. I was browsing Twitter. I saw there was this woman who was doing something completely alien to me, like buying returned goods from Amazon and Walmart in pallets and just selling them over eBay. And there was this tweet, here's how I did $70,000 in profit last year by just buying these pallets of returned stuff and selling them over eBay. And it was $25 as a video course. And I bought it out of curiosity. And it was really inspiring how basically, I mean, she went literally with her iPhone just to a warehouse, and she went with her car and explained what she did and how she picked the pellets and how she goes over the internet and which sites she chooses and so on and so forth. She just explained what she knew. And I was really fascinated. It was really $25 was well spent. Basically, I just spent an hour watching this video. It was really genuine, like first sort of person view of her world. And again, like it was an example of, I asked myself, what if I do it this way? I was still thinking I was going to write a book, and I thought, wow, I could probably do this in probably a day or two. It might even come off better, like if I just explain it, and I could share my screen, and that's something that really helped. Like I just shared my screen and went over a few examples of good tweets and good accounts and so on and so forth. And yeah, I think this is a good example of sort of realizing that there are different formats. This is a good example of the 80-20 rule. And by the way, when I was thinking about video, many people told me, video takes forever. You're going to spend for every hour of recording, you're going to spend 100 hours editing. And I just wanted to prove them wrong, like do completely the opposite. Like I did absolutely no editing. Apart from just literally just making my face in the sort of in the top bottom corner, which I spent probably an hour on that. But I just left all the all the sort of noises and whatever. And I think basically this is something interesting, that you could basically, people in this sort of market value information quality a lot more than production quality. As long as you meet some very minimum bar, that your sound is clear and whatever the text is readable and so on and so forth, and what you're presenting makes sense. What they value is what they're learning. This doesn't need to be a masterpiece that's going to live forever. Like this again, like I like to compare it with, like, you're listening to a talk at a conference. Like, just hear somebody talk for an hour, share a few slides. And the internet and having an audience just helps you price these things at a reasonable price point that makes it almost an impulse buy, pack a lot of information at high density, and just I can prove, and many people can prove, that you can find thousands of people willing to pay $25, $50 to learn something from you that might have taken you a year, 2 years to learn for yourself. It's a very compelling value proposition, right? So it worked really well, right? So I think, again, like, I encourage people to consider different formats. I had never done video. It's not something that I was comfortable with. I had never recorded myself, right? So again, like, I'm far from well polished presentation, but it works.
I mean, there's a ton of experimentation right now. Obviously, people are really into paid newsletters and creating Substacks where they can, create these subscriptions people can pay, which wasn't nearly as popular this time last year, and it was almost unheard of a couple years ago, except for a few standouts. Video courses, I've spoken to a few people, like Greg Rogg has a website, learnux.io, and he took the opposite approach. His are very high production quality. He spent a ton of time on it, but like you've sort of proven, like, you don't need to do that. It's just about like delivering actual insights. It's about giving away information for free online to build that audience beforehand, so that like people trust that your course is going to deliver those insights. It's about being transparent. Do you think you'll ever go back to writing ebooks? Like, would you always just stick with videos now that it's so much faster?
No. I think so. Yes, I probably might actually. No. I'm not against sometimes spending time to polish things, as long as you recognize that the polish that you're doing is not necessarily going to translate into more sales, or it's not directly proportional. I mean, it might improve a little bit, but it might not. If you spend twice the time, it might not double your sales. I think with basically now I'm starting to arrive in a situation where I think I can take more liberty and not be so extreme with my ROI targets, right? And and now if I need to write a book and I need to spend 2 months on it, I'm happy to do it, right? I feel comfortable enough that I will almost certainly, it's not never certain, right? But extremely likely that I'll make enough sales that it will at least cover my two months of time, right? So it's sort of I can do it much more comfortably. Whereas when I was doing those initial things, I'm completely honest. That has absolutely no idea whether I'll sell even a single copy. Right? To totally honest. Right? I mean, and with the second product, I had a bit more confidence, but
Yeah.
especially with the first one, just whether I sell $0 or $100 or 1,000 or 100,000, completely random. So I think that though that's why I think, as we mentioned at the beginning, that I think factoring in the probabilities, although they're very hard to calculate, is important, right? And in the beginning, the probabilities of this becoming a success were low, right? There was extreme uncertainty. So I chose how much effort to put into them in relation to the likelihood of them working, which I think is very, very important, especially in the beginning where you're testing the waters and just trying to understand what's viable, what's possible, what you'll enjoy doing, and so on and so forth.
I think one of the cool things about the way you approach things is that you leave so much free time that you have time to actually go back and look at the things that you've done in the past and analyze what worked and didn't work about it, which I see people often just kind of skipping. But also you have this exploratory time where, since your days are unstructured, you're not sure what you're going to do every single day down to the minute. You can take time to just like browse around Twitter or whatever and like discover people from other niches and other categories who are doing things in different ways. Like that's what gave you the inspiration to do your video. Whereas often I think people feel like, it's hard for them to come up with ideas. They don't have, that inspiration, or they're not sure how to iterate and improve on things because they don't leave that time. And I started doing this for myself recently. Like I bought an iPad last month or a couple months back and just created a new email account on it and just subscribed to a bunch of stuff just to read from all sorts of different niches. And I'll wake up in the morning with nothing to do and just like read random stuff for a couple hours. And it gives me a ton more ideas than when I wasn't taking the time to do that.
Absolutely. I think spare time, something that I definitely try to leave plenty of it. And I think it helps in two ways, as you're saying, like it invites inspiration. You're just bumping into random things and it makes you ask yourself sort of whether there's something you want to do. And I think it allows you to sort of pounce on the opportunity, right, when inspiration strikes. I mean, at least for myself, many people, whenever I mention this to people, some people believe that they work differently, but at least for me, I feel like it's sort of both inspiration and opportunity are perishable, right? They go away. Like you can't just put them on the shelf. I mean, I used to have, like many people do, like the ideas notes list in my app. And I stopped doing it. Like pretty much now, as soon as something inspires me, I wonder if there's an opportunity. And if it's there, I tend to just do it almost immediately. At least I'll start, right? I'll just start writing, start doing something, right? And it's how I'm liking and how I'm sort of liking to operate, right? It's sort of, you get this free boost of energy. Everything is still fresh in your head. Like you sort of, it allows you to benefit from luck when it happens, right? When you just serendipity, it gets you in the situations where you just see something that you might be able to do, and you see the opportunity that it might work. And you need to have the free time, right? If your calendar, if your days are so squeezed that sort of you need to schedule something 3 months from now, it's very likely that the inspiration will disappear, the opportunity, you might not see it again, right?
Yep.
It's just hard to get back again.
Tobias Van Schneider was the head designer at Spotify for a while, and now he runs a very successful SaaS company and a blog, but he had a blog post from a while back called Waste Your Ideas. And it was this exact same concept that, he used to think, I'm going to put my ideas on the shelf, save them for a rainy day, and eventually they'll be great. But like the consequence of that is that where are you left now? You're left with all your ideas on the shelf. You're not working on your best stuff. And those ideas probably are just going to get worse over time because, as you said, they're perishable. So it's much better, like when you have these ideas, do exactly what you're saying. Just get them out, get them down, like start working on them. And like you're going to have more ideas later. In fact, when you work on ideas, it's the best way to come up with new ideas in the future. So I think a lot of people are stuck in this state of holding on to their ideas like they're clutching their pearls. Like these are the last ideas they're ever going to have. But usually it's not the case. So
absolutely. No, go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, I'm taking up way too much of your time here, and I think we've been through your story from beginning to end, and you've learned quite a lot on the way. And I think you're super successful with your products. Like they're making a crazy amount of money every day, and it's just fun watching you. what have you learned from your successes so far that you think, a fledgling indie hacker might benefit from knowing? What should they take away from your story?
So I think something I learned. I think I probably mentioned two things. Uh, Something I learned about. I just tweeted about it this morning. Actually, I was thinking about what we might be talking about this interview, and again, like the inspiration. I thought it
Yeah.
might be interesting to people. I think I discovered another way of doing business, right? Because I used to think there's like this approach where you just product first, where you have a big idea and you try to make it work at all costs, right? And this is typically where people might end up looking for investments and things like that. Then there's the more traditional indie hacker approach where you sort of start with a business strategy, right? You just want to make a self-sufficient, bootstrapped business, right? So you start with the business strategy and you try to take prudent risks in such a way that you try to maximize profits with the constraint of what you have. And I think what I learned just by trying to do the second one is that there's probably another approach, which is more lifestyle first, right? Where you literally start with your preferred lifestyle
Hmm.
and then pretty much try to uh, make find business opportunities that enhance your lifestyle. And this is just, I think, knowing which one you're pursuing just helps you make decisions easier. Because at one point I thought I was doing I was uncertain whether I was doing the second one or the third one until it sort of it clarified in my head that it's the third one that I want to be doing, right? I'm doing these things to improve my lifestyle, right? So it's it really helps, and we touched on many things when we were talking about when choosing what to do and what to leave on the table, and sort of recognizing sort of this attitude is definitely helping a lot right now and helping me make decisions very quickly. The other point that I definitely learned and I significantly underappreciated was that uncertainty is extremely uncomfortable. Even though, as we said before, I was lucky. I had an abundant runway of over 5 years of saved expenses, and I had sort of planned my burn down, and I was tracking it. After a few months, it started to become really, really painful, almost psychologically, right? To just see these sort of losses accumulate in your savings account and not knowing when it's going to stop, when you're going to know when things are working, right? How long you have to wait. It's going to be,
Super
will I
stressful.
know in yeah, it's really, really stressful, right? And again, I really believe I'm not an expert, right? But it's really just from looking at myself. There's something in our heads that just makes us sort of worry about these things, probably for a very good reason. And I'm happy because it helped me reevaluate my strategy. And basically, I think my advice, it's still very general advice, right? But I think it's really important to try to find ways to tame the uncertainty, because I thought I was prepared for it, but it becomes really uncomfortable. And I think once you find a way to sort of tame uncertainty in such a way that you have sort of some very baseline that's like the downside is protected, I think things become much more easier in terms of motivation, in terms of just even identifying opportunities. I think many things I wouldn't have even noticed them in terms of opportunities, right? If I was still worried about focusing
Right.
100% on the one thing, right? Because it might have felt like a distraction. Like, why bother with the info product? Probably I would have said, why bother with info products? I would be wasting time from this big thing that I'm doing right now. Whereas by sort of, if you take the attitude that I want to try many different things because it's just going to help diversify, help me sort of spread my motivation and my attention on different things, it just also helps you expose yourself to new opportunities, new good fortune that you might not even recognize if you just focused 100%.
Well, I hope people take this to heart because this is all stuff that you can think about before you write your first line of code. Like before you do anything, you can think about, okay, why am I starting a company? What do I want my life to be like? What are the sources of stress and uncertainty and how do I minimize those? And I think people will be much happier and more successful with their companies if they listen to your advice. So, Daniel, thanks a ton for coming on the show and sharing your story with us.
Thank you, Cortland. This was really, really fun. One of my favorite podcasts, I think. So thank you. Thanks a lot for having me.
Where can people go to learn more about all the different things you're up to and follow you on Twitter as well?
No, yeah, I think the best way to follow what I'm doing is on Twitter. I tweet almost every day, pretty much. I try to keep a high signal to noise ratio, and I tweet mostly about my lifestyle, how I'm designing my lifestyle, and business related stuff. And I try to answer to all the questions. So feel free to DM me or email me if you want to bounce an idea, do something similar that I did, and you want to see my perspective. I'm always happy to share that. So yeah, Twitter is the best place. D Vassallo, DVASSALLO.
All right. Thanks again, Daniel.